Spock, when do you estimate penetration? Slowing now. Contact in 18.3 seconds. Brace yourselves. The area of penetration will no doubt be sensitive. That's what she said! Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for The Immunity Syndrome, which is episode 19 of Season 2 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Original Series. One episode at a time. In this video I will cover the Immunity Syndrome. So the Immunity Syndrome is the episode where the Enterprise encounters a giant amoeba that's eating the galaxy, and so they have to work hard to destroy it, even though they're getting sick when they get close to it. And that's pretty much all I gotta say for the synopsis of this. So historically, this is not an episode I like very much, which if you're familiar with my channel at all, you probably picked up on this because I mention this a lot, particularly when it comes to original series episodes with ridiculous premise. Whenever I'm complaining about how over the top and ridiculous the original series can be, I always bring up, episodes like Abraham Lincoln floating in space, a hand grabbing the Enterprise, and a giant amoeba eating the galaxy. I always lump that together as one of the ridiculous low points of the show. Now, doing some research on what people think about this episode, seems fairly highly regarded, and it's not one of the best or fan favorites of the original series, but reviews on this episode had seemed overwhelmingly positive, which really confuses me. In fact, one particular instance, and I hate to harp on this point because I feel like I'm harping on this enough, but one particular instance where I bring this episode up is when comparing it to the episode The Alternative Factor, which is one of my favorite episodes of the original series, yet it is hated and seen by many as one of the worst, and it perplexes me. It really confuses the hell out of me how people can like this episode better than The Alternative Factor. And because one of the criticisms levied at The Alternative Factor is that it's junk science. Well, so it has this guy from a parallel universe, the counterpart, the one from our universe and the one from the parallel universe are like traveling back and forth through the doorway, but if they ever come together in the same universe, it would have a negative reaction. They use the analogy of the way matter and antimatter meet. Now, some people got confused and thought, well, that means there's a universe made up of antimatter. That's not what they said. They used an analogy. But anyway, so for some reason, in some people's minds, that episode, that premise is more ridiculous, more junk science than a fucking giant amoeba eating the galaxy. That's apparently fine. I don't know. Maybe I don't want to judge. Maybe different people just have different ways of looking at science and science fiction and what constitutes a ridiculous premise and what doesn't. To me, The Alternative Factor is fascinating premise, especially the way that it's used. Now, is the episode perfect? No, but again, I covered this more in that episode. There are some flaws with it, but I still think the premise and the melancholy way they use that premise still makes it a brilliant episode. This is a dumb premise, which they don't really do anything with. Now, it's funny because one of the reviews I read on this episode, user reviews, was saying, oh, this episode's even better than the Doomsday Machine. And It's interesting that they bring up the Doomsday Machine because I feel like this episode is trying to be like the Doomsday Machine and failing. Now, one of the reasons why one would make the comparison to the Doomsday Machine is because this is one of the few episodes that used the same music that was used in the Doomsday Machine. Now, I know the other episode that I'm aware of was the previous one I covered, Obsession, which I forgot to mention in my review for that episode, that they did use the same music for the Doomsday Machine. And it was okay. Like, I feel like in the case of this episode and Obsession, like, it feels like the music is being misused, because in the Doomsday Machine, that was a very suspenseful, edge of your seat episode, and that music really enhanced it and was so great. And when they use it in Obsession, I'm like, this episode's not that suspenseful. I'm not that engaged with it, so the music didn't feel as good, didn't feel as potent. And in this episode, when they use the music, I'm like, oh, they're just trying to be like the Doomsday Machine, and they're failing because this isn't anywhere near as suspenseful or interesting as the Doomsday Machine. It's about, Kirk and crew going into a giant amoeba, and they said the amoeba could multiply, and then they would be the virus and the antibodies, and the amoebas will eat the whole galaxy. Attack of the Killer Amoeba! This is B-movie fodder. It is bullshit. But anyway, and the other thing about this episode is, so I mentioned this before and on my channel, but when I first, and I always remember this, and it's probably one of the reasons why I have such a bad taste in my mouth with this episode, because there's some other episodes of the original series that have ridiculous premise, but I was okay with it because I saw it as a teenager, and I'm more willing to go with ridiculous premise, such as Wolf in the Fold with their Jack the Ripper bullshit, and Spock's brain. And I think there was another example, like, the Apollo thing. Like, I'm more willing to go with this when I was younger, because there was more open to ridiculous premises. But with this episode, I hated this episode from the get-go. Never liked this episode. In contrast to some of these other episodes, I used to like it but don't anymore. I never liked this one. And part of the reason why, and this is a story I believe I told before, is I think I was around 13, 14. I must have been around 14 when I first saw this episode. And I had my very first hangover, and I got drunk as hell for the first time. The next day, I had a giant hangover, and I was lying sick in bed, so I was watching Star Trek, and I watched this episode, and this episode made my hangover worse. Particularly that loud, like, high-pitched, annoying sound that they make when they enter the amoeba or the dead space black hole, whatever the fuck it was that was surrounding the giant amoeba. I talked about in Dagger of the Mind how that high-pitched squealing of, like, the mind control machine was so annoying and grating and actually hurt my ears that I had to turn the volume down. This is worse. This is decidedly worse. Like, I had to, like, crank the volume down, like, super low whenever the high-pitched squeal. And some say that may get you in the mindset of the crew, because the crew itself felt sick whenever they had that noise, and you saw Chekhov going, and I'm like, I agree, Chekhov, that's how I'm reacting. But difference is, I'm not an officer serving on a spaceship flying into a black hole weird space. I'm someone watching a TV program for entertainment. I don't want to have my head split open by that fucking loud, annoying sound. It's, oh my god. And so, and I remember watching this with a blaring headache, and my head was pounding, and I was like, oh, God, what the fuck is this? And then everyone was getting sick, and it was making me feel sick, and there was a giant amoeba floating in space, and it made me feel even more sick, so maybe that's why I never sort of like this episode. Made my hangover worse. My very first hangover. And yeah, and even now, like, and maybe it's because of that memory, every time I watch this episode, I feel a bit sick. I think it's that goddamn noise, which is way too loud. And like, you can get across that it's loud to the crew without making it piercingly, like, painfully loud to your audience. That's possible. There's plenty of movies and shows that do this, but that's yeah, it has that grating effect of yeah. But anyway, let me be fair now. To be fair, when I watched this episode just now, actually, and you know, as I'm going through and doing a review for every episode, I try to like pay very close attention and analyze it. And watching it this time, it wasn't quite as bad as I remember. To be fair, there are some, like, I can kind of see what they were going for with a suspenseful, like, threat. I'm sorry, but Alternative Factor did it better. But I can't never not harp on that point. But anyway, sorry. But they're trying to do like this potential. They're trying to do a doomsday machine, basically, is what they're trying to do. But they're trying to do this potential threat to the galaxy, and they don't know what it is, and so the crew are struggling to figure out what the hell is happening. And I do kind of like that. That aspect of it is kind of interesting. How they don't know what it is, and they're trying to learn more information about it, and seeing Kirk like do his trial and error of trying to figure out like what is happening, and once he figures out how to stop it from happening. So that and I did feel the danger, to be fair, and it was sort of, I was somewhat involved, engrossed in the suspense of the episode, like not nearly as much as Doomsday Machine, but I was somewhat involved, you know, when Spock was floating in the shuttlecraft and the Enterprise was trying to save him. And the one thing I actually did kind of like, the one sort of McCoy moment of this episode I liked, is when Spock is like, called the Enterprise, is like, cease your attempts to save me. You're just gonna, you know, put yourselves in danger. And McCoy's just like, shut up, Spock, we're saving your life. That was actually funny. I actually liked that. I didn't like Spock's retort, which was, thank you so much, Captain McCoy. Like, oh, shut up, Spock. That's a dumb retort. But I liked McCoy's response. But this gets into a larger point, an issue I had with this episode, is Spock and McCoy are so annoying. And it's not like this in every episode, but there's been quite a few episodes where they take Spock and McCoy's bickering at each other. And I think season 2 has made this worse. And they crank it up to an annoying level. And this is definitely one of those episodes where they're just like sniping at each other. And, you know, it's funny because a lot of people bring up that McCoy is racist towards Spock and talking about you green-blooded Vulcan, which is true. And this is something not just about this episode, but the entire show I've noticed as watching it through, is that Spock is just as racist to humans that McCoy is to Vulcans. And maybe you could say that's just a response to McCoy, but sometimes Spock instigates it, to be honest. It's like, oh, you know, he always has his gripes about how humans are a bunch of primitive ape fuckheads. So, I don't know. I mean, that doesn't make McCoy's racism okay, but it also doesn't make Spock's racism okay. I think he's just as racist as McCoy. Just throwing that out there. But, anyway, and he's just as annoying, just as like his sniping and me. In this episode, probably the moment that bothered me the most was when they both wanted to sacrifice themselves and go in the shuttle, and Kirk didn't want either of them to go because they're his friends, and they didn't seem to like get that. They didn't seem to get that they were putting Kirk in the situation to choose which of his friends are going to die. They were just concerned about, I want to be the one that goes out there. Oh, no, I'm more qualified than you. No, you're more no, I'm more qualified than you. And that's the bickering. And not even noticing, I don't even think they were aware that they were sacrificing their goddamn life. And they it was obtuse to the fact that they were putting their friend in this really difficult situation. It was definitely shown by the fact when Kirk was like, I'm sorry, Spock. And McCoy took that to mean, oh, I get to go. Oh, sorry, Spock. I'm going to pack my stuff. Ha ha, in your face, Spock. I get to go. And Kirk's like, no, I'm sorry because you're the one who's going to die. And McCoy's like, oh. Well, fuck that. And then as Spock and McCoy are walking towards the shuttle bay, they're just snipping at each other even more. And McCoy is like, oh, why don't you get to go? I should be able to go. And Spock's gloating, oh, I'm the one that gets to go. I'm the one that gets to die. In your face, McCoy! And it's just so dumb. I don't like it. It seems out of character for me, and it's petty, and it diminishes both of these characters, I think. Just my humble opinion. Now, let me talk about how reckless Kirk is for a moment, because okay, so Kirk asked for, when at the start towards the beginning of this episode, when there's this like thing, and they just know that the ship of Vulcans died, and the whole solar system died, and they're investigating this, and everyone's starting to get sick. Like, that happened first. You get that loud, annoying sound as they got closer, and everyone, started getting sick, and McCoy had to, like, get all these people sick bay was being flooded, and Kirk is asking for opinions on what they should do next, and McCoy is like, well, my suggestion is that we survive. That's what we should do. We should survive. And Kirk then makes this call, ship-wide call, and he's kind of like, well, I know this is a dangerous thing, but our mission is not to survive. Our mission is not just to live. Our mission is to investigate what the hell this thing is and find out what it is and stop it from harming any others. Which, he has a point. But it seemed like he was being a real dick, especially to McCoy. And he was like, instead of like saying that to McCoy, he's like, no, he's going to say it to everyone. It's like, well, fuck you. Our choice isn't just survive. We need to investigate. But even though he's true to an extent, because it is their mission as Starfleet officers to safeguard the lives of the Federation, not to just worry about their own backsides, which is true. But the way he goes about it is incredibly reckless. He's like, all right, we're going to go in. Like, his crew is already starting to get sick just being, like, close to this weird black hole thing. And so he decides to just ram his ship in. And, of course, his crew get way sicker, and as soon as they get in, McCoy tells them that they're all dying. And the power is draining, and the ship is going to run out of power in 2 hours, and everyone's, like, going to die. And it's his direct fault for being a reckless prick. Now, you could say, well, on the other hand, like, maybe he wouldn't have been able to gather the information he needed to stop the damn thing had he not been so fucking reckless. But that's just luck. Really. I mean, you could say he took a calculated risk. I say he took a reckless risk, and then he just lucked out that it just so happened to pay off for him. I think the chances are much higher that he would just gotten everyone killed because he's a reckless fucker. That is just my opinion on that one. Yeah, so this is Amoeba. They go inside the amoeba and they put on the shields to disrupt the membranes of the amoeba before it duplicates. God, that's such a dumb premise. I don't understand how anyone can like this episode better than Alternative Factors. Nowhere near as good. It's like comparing Subverse to the best of both worlds. I'm sorry. Anyway, so let me get into some patron comments. First of all, I want to thank everyone, all my Patreon supporters, for supporting me on Patreon. Of course, it's very much appreciated. It does keep the channel going. We have Kyrie091, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Avals, Brian A., Alessandro Migalacio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal Howes. Thank you all so very much for your support. Now we'll get to the comments that were made on this video. First comment is from Brandon Neal Howes that says, the immunity syndrome. There's a giant space amoeba which has destroyed a ship crewed by 400 Vulcans, and Spock hears their collective death scream because he has force sensitivity way before Obi-Wan Kenobi. I'm sorry, can't pronounce this word quite right. Esquing, I believe. Common sense. Kirk orders the Enterprise to enter the zone of darkness and discovered it leads to an amoeba which is going to reproduce and eat the universe. Kirk, Spock, and McCoy argue about who will take a shuttlecraft and investigate the amoeba up close. Spock wins because he's competent after an interminable time during which most of the crew, including Spock, are close to death. McCoy works out the doing everything backwards is the solution to the problem. This is a boring, bitchy episode where McCoy's even nastier to Spock than usual. One McCoy saying, "Shut up, Spock, we're rescuing you," out of 5. Oh god. So 1 out of 5. Oh, I usually do a 10 scale, Brandon, but that's okay. You can do 1 out of 5. As I said, I think that that Spock is just as nasty as McCoy, just as annoying too. But I actually like the line when he said, "Shut up, I'm rescuing you." But anyway, the Spock getting the feeling, the disturbance in the forest was kind of dumb. How he could sense that the Vulcan ship has died, like he went, "Oh!" when the Vulcan ship exploded, and no one even knew that it did, but he could feel the disturbance in the force. Yeah, well, who is he, fucking Obi-Wan? What's going on? Anyway, next comment is from Ricky. Oh my god, this is one of the worst TOS episodes. Top 10 worst for me. I mean, the concept of an amoeba eating away the galaxy is so dumb. What the hell were the writers thinking? And again, this is another episode of the horrible Spock and McCoy bickering, which is so annoying. And another thing, does Spock have the Force? How does he know the Vulcan ship has been destroyed? Seriously, there's no redeeming qualities whatsoever. My rating is a 1 out of 10. Ricky, maybe being a bit more harsh than I would, but yes, I am glad to see that kind of response, because I don't understand why people were so big on this episode. I think that's a correct response. Amoeba in space is dumb. Anyway, for another perspective, we go to my final Patreon comment, which is from Matty Jester, that says, "Oh, this is one of those episodes where I feel like I'm going to be against the grain, as I like this episode. It's a weird sci-fi problem, not someone seeking revenge or just Klingons on the starboard bow again. I appreciate these sort of Trek stories. Everyone is willing to sacrifice themselves, but ultimately you go with the logical choice. This theme will be revisited more than once in the future. There's a ticking clock. 2, and it keeps me gripped till the end. I also hope they got their shore leave afterwards. I hate it when you're about to finish work and an important email comes through. 7 single-celled space amoebas out of 10. Well, Maddie, I will say this. Your opinion seems to go, actually, it might be in the minority here in my channel, but out in a larger track of fandom, you seem to be more in the majority. It seems to be more the case where people enjoyed this episode. So there you go. There was one thing also that was brought up to me by some of these reviews that I watched I didn't even notice, is that at the very end of this episode, once they resolve the situation, they're talking about taking their shore leave, I didn't even notice that someone had to point it out to me that Kirk was like perving on this like female crewman, because this yeoman who like gives him this paper and he's like gawking at her and staring at her while he's saying, "Oh, and I can't wait to enjoy my shore leave." And then as she turns to leave, he continues to glare at her and look at her ass. Yeah, that's kind of slimy of you, Kirk. And I didn't even notice this until someone pointed out to me, because I guess Kirk is always a slime ball, but whatever. Anyway, my rating for the Immunity Syndrome out of 10 is a 2, extremely poor. Now, to be honest, I've given this episode a 2 in the past, and I almost went 3. I almost went for a 3 after watching this episode, because I feel like it does actually have some redeeming qualities. Like, it was kind of interesting seeing the Kirk and the crew trying to work through this impossible situation, trying to figure out what's going on. But the more I talked about it and all the flaws in it, such as Kirk being a perv and Spock and McCoy bickering at each other so annoyingly, and that fucking sound that gives me a headache just by watching it, I gotta leave it at a 2. I do have to give this a 2. And overall, and here's the biggest point, the biggest reason why this episode gets a 2, because it's about a giant amoeba eating the galaxy. That's why. What is this, a fucking B movie? No. 2. Anyway, that is it for my review of the Immunity Syndrome. So now let me bring up my schedule to see what shall be going on my channel coming up next. So this week, Thursday, we'll be doing my latest review for the newest episode of Picard. On Saturday, I shall review Star Wars The Bad Batch Season 2 in its entirety. And next Monday, we'll be back for another original series episode with a piece of the action. So that's what's coming up on Enchantment of Eternity. So be sure to check out my channel for all that, as I cover many more Star Trek videos and many videos on many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.